Up next is today's first panel discussion, how high-performing workplaces can show compassion too. As we know, competitive, innovative businesses are demanding places to work. Employee engagement and retention depend on empathy and compassion, especially when workers are under pressure to take certain risks and deliver maximum effort. So what do sensitivity, empathy, and compassion look like in a workplace with high expectations? That's what we'll find out. This panel will be moderated by Trina Robinson, a name you may know in South Florida. She's a two-time Emmy-winning, award-winning journalist for NBC South Florida, where she anchors the news at 7 p.m. and co-anchors at 5 and 5:30. Besides anchoring, covering breaking news, and doing investigative reporting, Trina has also done feature reporting like Tina Tries It, where she did everything from tossing knives as a Benihana chef to using a chainsaw to make an ice sculpture. She has multiple college degrees, studying meteorology, and most recently topped it off with an MBA. So, Trina, I'm going to turn things over to you. Take it away.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Okay, guys, I do the 11:30 news sometimes, and I don't get home until like 1 p.m. You guys can give a better good morning than that. Good morning, everyone. We've got such a phenomenal panel here. You're going to be clapping through the whole thing. So hopefully we will get through it on time, though. They've told me to stick to the time. So our topic this morning is how high-performing workplaces can show compassion too. And with everything in the Twitter space and politics, yeah, we need a little bit of compassion, correct? Yeah, we sure do. So that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. And I have a passion for compassion. I think in the news business, you really better have some sensitivity to people or you're going to be out of business. So with that, let's check in with our illustrious panel. I mean, these people are so accomplished and so incredible. I've gotten to talk to all of them and read their bios, and they are dynamos in their industry. So I'm going to let them each introduce themselves, and we will start with Debi. Tell us a little bit about yourself and, you know, what makes you tick and about your organization, please.
Awesome. Good morning, everybody. My name is Debi Yadegari, and I'm the founder and CEO of Villyge. Villyge is a manager enablement platform that allows organizations to upskill their managers in care, compassion, and empathic leadership at scale. We provide the managers with the know-how to handle those sticky issues, those life events, as we call them in the workplace. And what makes me tick? I have 5 children, and I'm trying to make it a more compassionate workplace for the next generation of employees.
Fabulous. And we'll just keep on going down the line, so we'll have Federico next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Federico Demarin. I'm the Chief People Officer for GroupM. It's an advertising company. I've been in the people function for a long time, and I think this is one of the most interesting topics, so thank you. What makes me tick is actually looking into someone's eyes and see that you've added value to them. When you say something, when you ask a question, when you share, and you know that spark that says, I'm going to take note of that.
Phenomenal. Isabel.
Hi, good morning. My name is Isabel Montes. I am the Human Resources Vice President for Newmont. For those wondering what Newmont is about, it's the biggest gold producer in the world. And I moved to mining after 20 years of being with Starbucks. So a big, big change. And the reason why I made that change is because following what made me think. That is to impact as many people as possible from our function using the privileged position that we have.
On to you, David.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Bator, and I work for Achievers. Achievers is an employee experience platform that engages employees and empowers managers through employee recognition, listening, and connections. My job is I am the managing director of our Workforce Institute, which is a team of workforce and data scientists that underpin not only the product we develop, but also the counsel we share with customers And what makes me tick is white jeans and thinking and writing about how work could work.
Fabulous. And on to you, Tracey.
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Tracey Haynes, and I work with Microsoft. I'm an HR director there. I work virtually. I sit here in South Florida, actually, because I work with an organization, of course, that's spread out around the country and around the world. So I've been with Microsoft for about 10 years. And I would say, but one of the things is that in Microsoft, I work with the enterprise sales commercial business. And in terms of what makes me tick, I think it's very similar to a number of things I've heard here in that I'm also a certified leadership coach. And when you talk to a leader or manager and you're helping them really unpack some of their blockers and really achieve their aspirations, that's the stuff that makes me love what I do.
Fantastic. You can see we're going to have a great morning of dialogue. So let's go with this, and we're going to get their perspective on a couple of things. And first, I'd like to go to you, Federico. I'd like to begin by asking you how your collective experience navigating over the pandemic over the last few years has really changed your understanding of compassion in the workplace, and what shifts you've noticed in your organization. And so you can start, and then any of you who want to pipe in a little bit, we won't go too long so we can get through all of it. But Federico, kick us off, please.
Well, I was listening to the experience at Carnival, and I felt very close because at that time I was actually leading the people function for a travel retail company who also went through a lot, with all the duty-free stores closed. And it's very easy to just follow the force of, we need to reduce costs, and everything is about costs. And you have to be that force that pulls the company to balance at the end, because you just cannot resist it, but you can balance it. And you have to be the voice of compassion. You have to be the voice that put people first. And this is what really matters, right? Because a lot of companies say our people are first. But it's in this situation that you really need to show it, right? You really need to show that you stick to that poster that you put on the wall. So decisions on how you manage to keep benefits, when you need to cut salaries, who gets the cuts? Is the top or the bottom, right? And those decisions are the ones that matter. So I felt also drawn into these conversations when I knew I was going to be on one side, and many others, which was the easy place, was on the other. But eventually, you need to, raise up the leadership topic and say.
Excellent perspective. Yeah. Anybody want to add to anything that Federico said?
I think what has changed the most recently are really employee expectations. And I think we know all of that, and that's what's brought this panel together. Pre-pandemic, we weren't exactly, we might have been more focused on productivity and benefits and, how we're going to acquire talent. And now the flavor has changed dramatically, and it's the employees who have the voice, and part of that is generational shift. Within 3 years, 95% of the workforce is going to be millennial and Gen Z. Naturally, there's differences with each generation, and it's also the expectations coming out of the pandemic. We've had all of our lives turned upside down, and the way HR leaders need to react to that now is drastically different than it was just a moment ago.
You are so right. Let's move on to our next question, and we're going to send that one to Tracey and to Debi. And Tracey will start. How do you ensure that your company's stated values of empathy and compassion permeate the C-suite down to the entire organization? And what role do managers have to play in really setting the tone and the agenda and making sure it moves forward? Tracey.
Yeah, that's so important, because managers are really, they're the stewards of our culture, right? Because nothing happens unless they're role modeling the kind of aspired culture we want. So when you think of empathy, how do we get that to transfer, especially an organization like ours where it's over 100,000 employees? How do you get that sentiment, and not so just a sentiment, but the behavior to just trickle down through such a large organization? And I think there are about 4 things that we focused on when we went on a journey about maybe 6 years ago in terms of evolving our culture, including empathy, including growth mindset, etc. And one is the behaviors. First of all, defining what empathy means. Like, what is it for us? What is it for this company? What does it look like? And what are the behaviors we want to see and encourage to ensure then to reflect that this is demonstrating empathy? And then once we think through those behaviors and you're communicating them, also thinking through the systems. How is empathy being filtered through the systems? We have one of the things we looked at is our performance evaluation system. So rather than just focusing on impact and results, yes, that's important, but also how are you contributing to the work of others? And naturally that brings in empathy if you're focusing on others as well, right? So behavior systems, then we think about things like storytelling. Storytelling is so powerful, obviously, to get the message across. So we use individual employees telling their stories about how they use empathy or how empathy worked for them. And they did, and that was kind of filtered through the organization in town halls and different meetings, etc. And then I wouldn't underestimate the importance of symbolism. So how do we use symbols? So even in some of our organizations, in the cafeterias, et cetera, you'll see cups of different assets with the word empathy, with the words growth, mindset. Typically in organizations, you see posters, et cetera. So what are the symbolisms that you're using? So I think pulling all that together, the behaviors, the symbols, stepping back, looking at your systems, bringing it all together, to then giving the managers then a story that they can tell so they can reinforce and demonstrate and evangelize empathy throughout the organization.
And I know you have plenty to add on this because we had just chatted about this very thing. Go ahead, Debi.
Yes, I most definitely do. So studies show these days that 95% of employees value culture over pay. And further to that point, 85% of employees say that it's managers that drive that culture. So to your point, Trina, you have company policy, culture, mission statement, all of that up here, the C-suite, and then you have the employee experience, and there's this gap, and it is 100% correct, it is the managers. So it asks the question, how do we close that gap? And we have to know how to not just create a culture that is welcoming of empathy, but how do we upskill managers in the how-tos? And back to my point earlier of, employee expectations have changed. And one of those things that have changed so much is the recognition that what happens back here in the lives of employees affects how they show up on Zoom and also how they show up physically in the office. Today, they're bringing with them, their adoption stories, their divorce stories, their elder care stories, their parenting stories. And as workplaces, we have to react to that. And as managers, we have to have the compassion to those individual situations, but in a way that also continues to push productivity forward. So as organizations, we have to think about how we can power up our managers, what at Villyge we call an absolute power skill, empathic leadership, and that's what we are all about. And it is so necessary to give employees and more managers the tools to understand how to react not just to an employee's leave situation, but how to respond appropriately to an employee's miscarriage or divorce or burnout. Burnout is an incredibly popular life event that so many of us here in the audience, our managers and especially HR are going through too. So that's where we have to go deeper as organizations, is trying to close that gap between the policies up here, the employee experience, and giving managers the tangible tools to close that gap.
And those tools are so important. Debi,
Yes.
Thank you so much. This is going to go to David. How can organizations ensure managers are equipped to effectively respond to employees with compassion and empathy? And what kind of skills should managers focus on to achieve this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And maybe I'd first pick up on something that Debi was talking about, this shift that we're seeing from policies to principles. When you think about command and control organizations, for years, we'd create policy on high, we'd cascade it down throughout the organization, and the call to action was, comply. But with those expectations you were talking about, we're really seeing a shift from policies to principles. And I think one of the principles that organizations need to rally around is the distinction between employee engagement, which is really about an individual's commitment to doing the job they're paid for, and employee experience, which is around creating the conditions so that employees can do the best work of their lives in the first place. One of the things that we see, a tie that really binds that employee experience together where managers is concerned, is a focus on belonging. And in particular, managers who are focusing on creating employee experience that are principally focused on ensuring that employees feel welcomed in every interaction, that they feel known. Debi was speaking earlier about the recognition of a whole person, that they are included, that they are supported, and they're connected. Our research shows that this area leads to belonging as an outcome, and belonging by extension is a driver of all the other sorts of things we care about, like engagement, productivity, and so on. I think the second constant that managers should be aware of is a focus on frequent contact and frequent recognition. So in so many cases, when we take a principle-focused approach, it's about understanding who an individual is, their whole self. It's about creating space frequently to understand the things that motivate them, the obstacles that may be in their way. And then it's recognizing the things that are little and big that actually drive the outcomes everyone cares about.
Excellent.
I just want to, chime on there. You mentioned the word care. When we show care to our employees, they care back 3x. It's the greatest return on investment. And the way they care back is by loyalty, by working harder. Harvard Business Review recently published a study that showed on average when managers check in and take the pulse of their employees about all that stuff that's going on in the background, they give a minimum of 10% more. As we're entering downward, a downward economic situation, all of us are looking for how do we get more squeeze, from every one of our employees' efforts. And one of those ways is something as simple as just helping our managers to care, reminding them to check in on their employees. And it can be the greatest return on investment where HR budgets are, a little bit small sometimes.
Thank you.
Can I add one quick
Please,
thing?
Tracey.
Just one quick thing, because everything you guys just said is so true, right? But then how do you make that stick, right? And I think to your point, you talk about building that manager capability is to help, how do you make it a little bit more programmatic a little bit for the managers to find the opportunities and the space to do some of that work, to show care. So we have a manager capability. We say managers need to model, coach, and care, right? We actually use that word care. And you hear managers repeat it because the language, I've realized, really makes a difference. And as long as you take the time to teach people what the language means, but that repetition of the language and easy frameworks that people can grab onto, I think also helps these kind of deeper, more complex ideas stick and become actual habits.
Terrific input. Isabel, let's go to you now. What are the unique barriers to creating an empathetic workplace within the organization or industry, and how do you try to break down those barriers?
Well, so let me kind of paint the picture, right? So this is mining. So you are in very remote areas, usually about 4 hours or more in a bus from the biggest, closest city, which could be a city of about 200 people. So these places are really, really far away. A lot of the times you need to fly in, fly out, and stay on site for about 2 weeks, then go to see your family 1 week and go back. So with that picture, think about compassion, right? So to answer your question, I think the biggest barrier is just the nature of the business. And the fact that it's hard to find that balance between the way how we need to operate and the personal needs. And for me, I often talk with the leaders that it's not a binary system. It's not about performance or compassion. It's about the two of them together. And in these conditions, how do we do it? One is that we have been very focused on a little bit of what Tracey was saying of how do you programmatically help the leaders to learn, right? We are miners. We are very technical people that not necessarily has been nurtured in a way or have worked in a place where people is more front of mind because you have customer service or because we don't have competition basically. So it's a challenge. People is asking for more, and how we help the leaders to build that capability is one of the biggest kind of efforts. So compassion capability. We are building it through the implementation of something called the Employee Experience Framework. And basically it's a guideline that it tells the leader, okay, when you go to a conversation, try to think about these different conversation starters that can help you to understand a little deeper where that employee is at, what that employee cares about, that goes beyond pay, like Debi was saying. The second point, it's about bringing closer the executives to the ground truth, how I like to call it. Because the higher you go in the ladder, the more remote that you get from where really it's the day-to-day. So really making sure that from the people perspective, we are helping these leaders in drafting their agendas when they are on site. Like, don't stay in the meeting room and have these wonderful, like, 2-hour meetings where you see the results. Really go walk the site, walk the rooms, sit down with the people, have lunch with the people. Don't have lunch with your other fellow executives. Meet with the youngest, more recent hire and the whole trucking team and ask questions about that. So that's the third, like bringing that transparency and reality check to the executives so they can make the right decisions for the people. And the third point is co-creating. So really creating environments where we can sit down with the employees to talk about the problem, because the problems are very complex. And it's no longer only the responsibility of the company to solve for it. People want to be part of it. And the best way for us to solve, the best way for us to design is with that human-centric approach that it's only achieved when we sit down and co-create.
That's so good. Isabel, thank you for that. We go to Tracey and then David on this one. What are some of the benefits of cultivating more compassionate workplace? And all of you have touched on that a little bit, especially where there is immense pressure to meet and exceed expectations.
Yeah, I definitely, right, and can't get away from that pressure. There's always that pressure. And I think that, sometimes, and some of you will recognize this, there's some people maybe back in the office who think empathy is kind of like, that's the wishy-washy thing. I don't know what that means. What does that even have a place in business? And I would say that there is actually business justification, aside from the right thing to do, there's actually business justification for empathy, because empathy is not just, I think, empathy for our colleagues or employees. And with that, we think about the empathy in an organization. People, all the things we said, people like to come to work there, they feel respected, and then you have better retention, right? And that's important. But there's also empathy to the customers, if you have customers, in terms of being able to step in their shoes, understand their point of view, because that's what empathy is, understanding someone else's feelings and then being able to take action on it. So if you understand then your customer's point of view, you're able to relate to your customers, obviously that's better relationship, that translates to revenue, et cetera. I was reading a story about Ryanair. I don't know if you know that, it's a small airline in Europe, and they implemented a program to raise customer service awareness, customer satisfaction, and empathy awareness. And after that year, their profits increased something from 800 million euros to 1.4 million euros. And the CEO said, wow, I wish I had known, if I just be nice to the customers, this could happen, right? So big impact on the bottom line of the business there. And one other thing I would say, for passing on to David, in terms of empathy, the impact on your brand and impact on design, right? I know in Microsoft, we've seen where, as we design products, having that empathy, having that ability to think about others and step in their shoes has had a huge impact in how we design products and then our brand image out there. So I would say that the thing about empathy is not just about a nice to have. There's a real business imperative to have empathy be stronger in your culture.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I think, spoiler alert, very rarely do the best ideas come from the boardroom. One of the things that we're seeing in our research is that there's a great tension and disconnect between the things we are building for our people and the lived experience of our people. And that's because so many of the things we build are very supply side focused. Look at all the benefits we have for you, or look at all the employee communications programs we have for you. And not enough is done from a demand side. Here are the moments that you told us that matter to you. And I think this is a really, really important distinction, because the truth is, as Debi was saying earlier, one of the things that has evolved over the last 30 months is that employee expectations have changed. We see record levels of resignation, we see labor shortages, and yet what we know is that when we invest in conditions for employees to, again, feel welcomed, feel known, feel included, which might be the most important aspect, that they have a shot to be part of co-creating what the employee experience is, when they're also then supported and connected. As I was saying earlier, we see that drive not only in belonging and compassion, but all the other business outcomes that come along with that.
Yeah. And I just want to add that, I'm starting to see conversations out there happen where, like, all right, the tide's turned, employers are now getting the upper hand. Before, employees don't have the luxury of just walking away now. Things are getting tight. We actually need to cut. So, all right, good. So, this idea of the employee expectation changing, it's going to flip back. Not so quick. Because with layoffs at a mass scale, we have to worry about employee engagement by those who stay and remain within our companies. And the best thing that we can do for our companies as we go through tight times is to show compassion, to lead with empathy, to care, because it's going to drive employee engagement. And back to Tracey's point, not just helping the customer, it's also going to drive innovation. And that is going to, drive long-term success. So this is definitely something that cannot be considered a nice to have. Compassion in the workplace, empathic leadership, these are must-dos.
Please, Federico.
And I think part of our role as the people organization is to make sure those are not just words, right?
Yes.
When you say empathy, when you say compassion, how do we make sure those words are included in senior leadership interviews? How do we make sure they are included in performance conversations? Mm-hmm. When you do talent mapping and high potential assessments, are they even there? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes it's all about KPIs and you really need to make sure they're part of a conversation in every single thing we do around that cycle. So they're not just words, because it's very easy to stick with the words, right?
And to that point, I think there is also talk about, we need to stop and review our managers based upon how they're showing up for their employees. Mm-hmm. Because when we start to judge our managers, not based on their individual KPIs of their team, but start to draw that connection, we're going to get more. We're going to make it programmatic, the way Tracey said earlier.
Great nuggets, guys. Thank you. Of course, we want employees to be productive and give their best, but that's not always possible, really, for a variety of reasons. How do you effectively balance motivating employees and showing empathy and sensitivity? Federico, to you, followed by Isabel.
Sure. I think first, following the same line, you need to show that you really mean business when you're saying those things. So bringing, for example, empathy, compassion, emotional intelligence, and you just cannot expect people to have it at the level that you want. So for many years, we heard that some things you just have, you cannot develop, and that's really not true. We all know that. But what are you doing in your company to develop those things? How do you teach people to be more empathic? How do you give them experiences so they can really prove that they can progress? And how much of your programs, how much of your budget goes into that really makes the difference, because people have heard these words a lot, but then they want to see, okay, show me, where is it? Where can I see it, touch it, hear it? And this is what we definitely can do to prove that there's a point. So I think the pandemic has showed us that, mental wellness, stress, burnout, there are real things that are affecting, even when people are at home. Sometimes before the pandemic thought, if you're at home, you can definitely work more relaxed. And for many people, that was definitely not true. So what are we doing in everything we do, not just adding benefits or sending, instead of giving you fruits in the office, now I'm sending them home. That's good, no complaints, but how about burnout? What are we really doing? And I had a conversation last week with a manager that we were talking specifically about compassionate leadership. And he was saying, I keep fighting for more resources so my team can have, a break. And I said, okay, what are you doing on your day-to-day to help your team? Because if the answer is no, the company cannot allow you to hire more people, then what then? So it's like, I have to ask them to step up. Like, are you stepping up? Are you covering those hours so sometimes some of those team members have some time? And that's compassion at the end. It's not just raise your hand, ask for something you know you're not gonna get, and say, my job is done, right?
Poignant points. Isabel.
Yes, for me, it's all that you shared, Federico, and also as a people leader, helping the leaders I serve to build on those capabilities. And when I have those conversations, I basically try to focus on three main skills. One is listening with a lot of curiosity. So really trying to develop that skill of leaving all your preconceptions at the door and sit at that table or sit in the couch and really just be curious. Ask a lot of questions and be very active on that listening. So the solutions and the how to solve for can be really relevant to the need. The second point, it's about ensuring that we are open and more aggressive about challenging the status quo. And it goes a little bit to what Debi was saying on, I think it's more about the principles than the policies, because the policies won't fit everybody, and people is asking for solutions that are tailored to their needs. So we need to evolve to a place where we are going to be providing freedom within a framework. And I know for all of us that have been for a long time in HR, it's a little bit like, what do you mean? No policy. And the reality is that we need to start challenging. So yeah, you work from 9 to 5, but this other employee, that schedule doesn't tailor, doesn't respond to the needs. So how can I keep this employee engaged and contributing in a way that also balances their whole personal situation? So that's the second point of challenging the status quo. And the third one is being very intentional on sharing the why and connecting that why with the personal purpose. Because it's never easy. There are no resources, the expectations is always higher, so do more with less. And when, as an employee, as a human, we don't understand the why, it's just harder. But if that why is clear and makes my life worth it, and it connects with my higher purpose of really why I'm going and walking through life, then it's easier to make those trade-offs and those sacrifices.
I just wanted to jump in a little bit, and I think one of the ways that we create empathy and compassion is that employees feel supported. You know, when you're riding high and when the seas are a little stormier, and one of the ways employees feel support is that they experience action in response to some of the feedback that both Federico and Isabel were talking about. One of the things our research pointed out recently is that just 52% of organizations are even asking employees about their culture, and only 18% of employees say, you know, the organization does anything with the feedback that they collect. So this is a major missed opportunity because, once again, the best ideas don't come from the boardroom. And if you're giving space to understand what work should look like so that it works for employees, you have to give equal or more space to involving employees in actually taking action on the things they said.
This next question goes to Debi, and then anyone else can chime in who would like to. And I'm sure this is probably the one that employees want the most out of. What are some of the biggest areas for improvement you still see? Because, you know, in any company, all of us have ideas of how it could be done better. You know, if we were the quarterback, we'd do this. So what improvements?
Really, going back to Tracey's point, it's a matter of systemizing how we are closing that gap. How, and back to David's point, you know, how do we create that belonging? And back to Isabel's point, how do we continue to push productivity by understanding that individual's circumstance? And I think the answer there is really providing managers with the tools to stand empathetically in the shoes of their employees to understand this person, for instance, might be going through a fertility journey, which affects 1 out of 8 employees at all of our organizations. And that requires that person to be out of the office on a weekly basis. How do we make sure that the goals for this week and next week and the one that follows are in black and white? and clearly set, so that way we can feel comfortable giving that employee the flexibility that they need to juggle what's going on in the background as they move forward. And also to the culture point, I just want to share a quick story. I was speaking to the head of HR at a manufacturing plant, 20,000 employees strong, and they were noticing that the productivity of their nighttime workers were 2x that of their daytime workers. And it was curious, why would people be working harder at night? And they kind of were interviewing employees, they couldn't figure it out. Finally, they talked to the manager, and the man was like, what do you do differently? I don't know, I just put on some music, we're talking, we're chatting. The difference there was the culture and the feel. It was a happier place to work at night. They were partying. They were, putting their widgets in boxes, but they were doing so with their friends, within a community setting, so that way when things are getting hard and stressful, you're doing it as a team, and we've got to be conscientious of bringing that team feeling back, driving our organizations to be more human-centered, and we're all going to reap the benefits if we do so.
Fantastic. The description for this panel posed the following question: what does empathy and compassion look like in competitive, innovative workspaces and places with high expectations? If each one of you could take that, and we'll start with you, Tracey.
Okay, thank you, Trina. I would say two quick things. One is, and someone touched on this, is that we keep talking about empathy, but I just want to really land that empathy and accountability are not mutually exclusive, right? We still have organizations that need to produce, so it goes both ways. And I was looking at a 4-box with, if you think of accountability on the vertical and empathy on the horizontal, that piece where it's only empathy and little accountability, you're not going to have a very successful workplace. At the end of the day, you're not going to have even an employee who feels fulfilled or accomplished. So that point. And I would say, just in terms of an example or a story, one of the things that a story from Microsoft that always sticks out at me, and again, in someone using empathy, there was this blind guy, and he always had difficulty. He always had to go to a restaurant with someone else because he could never read the menu, obviously, etc. Someone had to read it for him. And someone within Microsoft just designed some technology, and this is bringing technology into it, so that he can carry this device with him, going to the restaurant. It scans the menu, and then it reads it out to him, so he can go there alone. So this is just a small example of bringing using empathy, not just for being nice to each other in work, but using it for real business solutions and real business outcomes.
Let's keep on down the line.
Yeah.
David.
I think one of the things we need to do is disabuse ourselves of the notion that everything we build for our employees must scale. We love scale, but I think I heard it said the other day, we're in the era of the individual, and this likely predated COVID. One of the things that employees are not willing to relinquish is the autonomy they have come to enjoy over the last number of months. And so I think one of the best things that I heard actually was from an HR leader in Atlanta a couple weeks ago. And I said, all the systems and new approaches and pilots you've been trying over the last 30 months, what's the best thing to come out of the last 30 months for you? And she said, it's these 3 words: how are you? They now begin every single team huddle meeting with those 3 words, and they give just as much space for asking that question as they do listening and then responding to what people say. And this leader was saying that the number of times they've ditched their entire agenda because they stick with how an individual or several individuals are feeling. This is the sort of advent, I think, that empathy and compassion lead to. And by definition, this isn't going to scale, but it's an investment we need to make in our people because they're the core of everything we do.
Isabel.
Yes, so again, right, big on listening with curiosity, challenging the status quo, and a little bit of what Tracey said on leveraging your expertise. So my story takes us back to Suriname. It's a little country in South America, close to the Guyanas. The site is super remote, and when meeting with the woman, and seeing that we really have a hard time keeping them after they become mothers, I started asking the why is it happening? And the concern of these mothers is that they couldn't provide milk to their babies after 3-month leave, that is what is approved by the government. So they felt guilty of being away. They knew that they could provide a better future for their kids by doing that sacrifice, but they were sacrificing the babies by not giving them the milk. So we just look around and I thought, okay, all these engineers, gosh, somebody has to be able to crack this down. So we met with the kitchen operators, we meet with engineers and started thinking what we could do. And the solution that we came up with is that the trucks that bring the food on like every 3 days could bring the milk down to the biggest city. So families could go there and get the milk for the babies. So that's what we did. We implemented the lactation room and sold to be able to bring the milk to the babies. So it's really, have we done that before? No. Did we know it was going to work? No. But give it a shot, listen to the people, and respond to the needs.
Boy, that brings a lot of value. Federico.
Thank you. On top of what my colleagues have said, which 100% agree, I would focus also on the role of leadership and how we make sure that leaders understand that we're in the infinite game of human progress. And that doesn't mean that you're going to solve all the problems yourself. It doesn't mean that you're going to move the mountain, but you can move a stone and then another stone. And maybe your journey ends there in that company and you move to the next. But how do you make sure in all high-performing companies, they always focus on progress. They focus on evolution, on their business. Now, when we talk about compassion, when we talk about empathy, what is that stone? What is that little inch that I can move closer? So every year, in every quarter, I said, I progressed. I helped this company in this journey that I'm in my decision fork. When I can go left or right, and this is a bit more human, is a bit more compassionate. What did I do? And how can I do better? So hopefully we will, as collectively, start moving those mountains. And I think where the pandemic pushed us in a direction that is huge. And we all have this opportunity. You don't need to be a senior leader. You can be anywhere in the organization and you're going to face that decision every day. So what are you doing? What's your little stone that you're moving?
Fantastic. Debi, we're down to a minute, or a
Okay.
little less now.
I got it. I would say the biggest takeaway here is that driving empathic leadership within your organization isn't just telling your employees and your managers to be nice. It goes a lot further than that. And back to some of the other points that were being made, we're absolutely focused on productivity, and we've got to understand that there's a direct correlation with compassion and productivity, and it's about empathic leadership. How do we recognize where our employees are standing in that moment, needing to breastfeed their babies and being away from them? How can we look at what our employees' specific needs are, which were mentioned earlier, and respond in an appropriate way so we can continue to push productivity forward while meeting the individual needs of employees today?
Beautiful. Just a great panel. You guys are unbelievable and such great information, interesting, fascinating, and stuff that we can all use. I don't know if you guys noticed while I was up here, I got stuck on the tape. So I was like trying to get off of it. I hope some of the wisdom and kernels that they provided today sticks with you. Don't get stuck on the tape, but keep some of what they've given you because they've been phenomenal. Give them a round of applause, please. Thank you, panel.